Hello, everyone. My name is Spencer Walsh. Welcome to today's show. Thank you so much for joining us here today. We got a good one for you, as always. On the show today, we are talking about a big story leading the news at the moment. It is in New York City, and it revolves around the migrant crisis and Eric Adams. He continues to try and scaremonger, fearmonger about the migrant crisis that a lot of people think is helping Republicans big time. And, you know, they are clearly using it to his advantage. We'll break down all the latest, to their advantage. We'll break down all the latest from that situation. Meanwhile, we have the Stop Cop City activists. That's the big police training center in Atlanta that is going on despite a huge community backlash. Those activists are getting charged with RICO charges, RICO predicates. I'll give you the details on that. A really kind of scary situation of, you know, you want to see a crazy indictment, you want to see some lawfare. Trump supporters will take a look at that. Also, a look at the COVID welfare state and why it really did help Democrats win elections big. We will wrap up today's show, though, with a look at Medhi Hasan interviewing Vivek Ramaswamy. Gonna be a good one. Welcome to Newsflash. All right, we will get back into it and start off today. And once again, just a little bit of note, obviously, you know, going to address the kind of background noise in the room. That is obviously the fan that I have going on because it's about a bazillion degrees in this room. Yeah, so it's a very big East Coast heat wave that we got going on. And so we've got to keep everything, you know, nice and cool, at least to a certain degree. You know, kept it on a lower setting while I was recording, but, you know, just don't want to just be absolutely talking to you just dripping sweat, which is exactly what would be happening if I didn't have this fan going on. Anyway, speaking of people in the hot seat, it's Eric Adams. He has had a pretty broad and pretty major crackdown on all things related to migrants over the recent period, because Greg Abbott and a lot of I think DeSantis, I think just pretty much a lot of the Republican border states, Abbott has definitely been the biggest one, that have just been shipping migrants up north, busing them, flying them up north into so-called sanctuary cities to try and really freak people out. I mean, they haven't been the only one. New York has been, you know, probably one of the biggest ones that's received the most, but it has been a pretty solid, pretty, you know, crazy situation. I mean, there's definitely ways they could, you know, handle it better. There's definitely ways they could, you know, distribute it. There's, you know, just ask, you know, the many other cities that Greg Abbott has been sending migrants to, how they're handling it. You know, they're not in the national news. Just giving Republicans talking points, giving them the perfect person to point to and say, okay, look, the mayor of Deep Blue, New York City, seemed like enough is enough here, because, you know, that's exactly what he's doing. In a sharp escalation over the migrant crisis, Mayor Eric Adams claimed in stark terms that New York City was being destroyed by an influx of 110,000 asylum seekers from the southern border, and said he did not see a way to fix the issue. Again, like, you know, I was just in New York City, and the biggest impact that they seem to have on the city, and I'm pretty much, you know, I was there for a few days. I spent pretty much a day in every single borough. You know, it's not a perfect look around the city. Obviously, I'm not, a sociologist or anything like that, but I think it was pretty clear. You know, the biggest effect that they have is that, you know, you see them coming in and wanting to, set up a, sell candy out of a cardboard box, like the inside of a cardboard box, or fruit or something like that, and they ride on the subway trains, and they all have little kids, and it's a really kind of a sympathetic situation, and they mostly just go around, they got like a bunch of Milky Ways or a bunch of Snickers or whatever, and then they go around the train, and no one really puts any effort into, saying hi to them, or saying, really kind of, they're just like, thank you, no thank you, and they just kind of keep going on and go on with their day. The idea that the city is being destroyed, again, by them, is just, it's a needless over-exaggeration. and it is a representative of a complete failure, a complete lack of interest by the mayor's office to do anything with regards to actually seriously trying to help them. You know, you don't even have to put them all in the city. You know, you can just put them all redistribute them. You could help them on a pathway to citizenship. All it takes is, and you know, I'm sure Biden would probably give some sort of federal support, some sort of effort on this. Just an effort to resettle, to get these people acquainted, to with whatever legal way is the most possible. But yeah, this represents a complete failure. This is like, it's not even like, well, we tried and we failed and that's the way it goes. It's an unfortunate situation, but oh well. This is not that. This is a complete lack of even trying or even caring. And this is what happens when you get that. So he goes here. Let me tell you something, New Yorkers. Never in my life have I had a problem that I did not see an ending to. I don't see an ending to this, said the mayor on Wednesday night in his opening remarks at a town hall-style gathering in Manhattan. This issue will destroy New York City, which is really kind of a pretty incredible thing, a pretty remarkable, crazy, I would say way over dramatic thing to say, because it's just like, if they keep doing this, and again, it's only 110 over the span of 110K over the span of months in a city with a population of 8 million. Putting that in a certain degree of perspective there, it's a pretty small percentage, but still, it is a, it's not a problem. It's not like it's not a problem, or it's a problem is the wrong word. It's not something that needs to be dealt with, but it is a situation that is not nearly as adequate. The point I'm trying to say is the choice that he's making to paint this in the most dramatic possible terms, just running in front of the cameras and saying that, because make no mistake, that is what he is trying to do. That is just that. It's a choice. It is a severe choice to come in and say, we are going to make this dramatic. We're going to make it seem like, this, again, it's just going to destroy New York City. He's clashed with leading members of his party as New York has struggled to provide housing services to migrants. For months, Adams has criticized Biden and Hochul for failing to help the city handle the asylum seekers and pleaded for additional funding and expedited work permits. I think that kind of additional funding, expedited work permits, I think it's a relatively fair thing for him to ask for. But then, going on this, national, PR campaign for the Republicans and the worst ideals of kind of anti-migrant politics, that is something that's completely unexcusable. He pointed to new projections. The city's budget gaps could go to nearly $12 billion, the same amount the city officials estimate that migrants could cost the city over 3 years. Every community in the city is going to be impacted. Adams said at the meeting we'll have a $12 billion deficit that we're going to have to cut. Every service in the city is going to be impacted. All of us. The surge of migrants crossing the southern border has overwhelmed the city with nearly 60,000 occupying beds in traditional city shelters and more than 200 emergency sites. New York City students returned to school Thursday. City officials said that 20,000 migrant children were expected to join them. That's a really incredible amount of just percentage-wise of just children coming in there. So he called, saying last week the city's requests were mostly unaddressed, the mayor said, and called for the federal emergency and a national decompression strategy at the border. And then, you have Kevin McCarthy go through kind of a forked tongue, Mayor Adams is right. New York City deserves better. The mayor's remarks on Wednesday provided more ammunition for Republicans, including Representative Nick LaLotta of New York, who applauded Adams on X, the website formerly known as Twitter, for being truthful about the crisis and urged him to repeal New York City's sanctuary city policies. If that's going to get it to stop, he may as well. You'll have no problem doing it. But, so now finally, deep down in this New York Times article, we get to kind of the critiques of this. It raised the ire of immigrant advocacy groups and some Democrats who called the mayor's rhetoric toward migrants racist, a dramatic departure for a city where Ellis Island served as a gateway to America for decades. And again, New York City should be a gateway. It doesn't mean that all the people have to be sent there. I mean, they should be sent, given, a certain package of money, or, a certain relative package for them to, get to another place, distribute it to other parts of New York, shift the burden, And if you essentially pull it's a completely unideal situation that Greg Abbott's taking advantage of, but I feel like if you essentially pull a Greg Abbott type situation on everyone else, and then it's kind of a MLM until, kind of this distribution scheme of just spreading it out more and more and more, eventually it's going to become where, it's a manageable amount for everybody, and each kind of locality is going to be able to set up a site for these people so they can be integrated into the society in some sort of a, certain respectful, normal way. The Legal Aid Society and the Coalition for the Homeless that said that Adams' comments villainized people who fled unimaginable situations in their home countries and sounded like French politicians on the far right of the political spectrum. So the city is required to provide shelter to anyone who needs it, a mandate that has presented an enormous challenge for Adams, who said that who has tried to weaken it through legal and strategic measures. He has sought to appear welcoming to migrants while also raising the alarm about the financial impact of hosting them. So again, that's New York Times helping him quite well with that. But anyway, we will go on now to our next story. A pretty interesting one here, where on Tuesday, the Georgia Attorney General's office made public a sprawling indictment of 61 protesters and organizers. With a really kind of incredible charging here. Under the state level racketeering, influenced, and corrupt organization statute, prosecutors allege a grand anarchist conspiracy to exact threats and violence upon society writ large. So, yeah, really some pretty incredible stuff for people who have been, by all accounts, by all kind of objective, non-biased accounts, they have been, they've been active, they have been deep level organizing, they've been very committed, they've, been done high levels of civil disobedience, but violence is not something that they are really accused of doing by pretty much non-biased actors. So this is here where they kind of go to the next level on it. So legislators passed RICO statutes in the 1970s and 80s to ensnare slippery mafiosos, but as the decades wore on, we saw the breadth of crimes admissible under the versions of the law that have kind of made it an attractive tool for enterprising prosecutors. Prior to Donald Trump's recent indictment under the statute, RICO's status as a catch-all law that nonetheless levies heavy penalties made it a weapon of choice against groups as diverse as cheating school teachers, gang truce negotiators, unions, Major League Baseball, and tobacco companies. On the civil side, corporations have leveraged RICO statutes to undercut environment and animal rights groups, including PETA and the Humane Society, as well as Greenpeace. In the indictment, Georgia concocts a red string conspiracy theory linking crimes committed during the George Floyd uprising to the Stop Cop City movement. So essentially saying this is a big conspiracy to kind of commit violent crimes continuously over a extended period of time, and the fact that is they kind of have to draw that line from all the way from 2020 to to their next big point, to their next big explosion of political activism, which was obviously the Stop Cop City protest, which again was this big police training center they wanted to build in kind of this forest on the outskirts of Atlanta. There's a big kind of community backlash to it, which the largely Democratic council went through with anyway because of the powerful Atlanta police department was obviously deeply for it. So then of course the Georgia state government was for it as well. Even though the first alleged crime named in the indictment occurred on the 5th of July, 2020. Prosecutors made the symbolic decision to date the start of the conspiracy to May 25th, 2020, the day of George Floyd's murder. So he's saying essentially this backlash, this response to this heinous crime is something that needs to be punishable. It needs to be punishable by the strongest possible facets of the law. They are not playing around on this. I think it's really, really clear. And this is something that they're going to come after you with the full power of the state for doing what they did in the fashion that they did. All right. That concludes that story. But again, for now, we will definitely be coming back to that story in the future. But, we do have this very kind of interesting viewpoint. I just want to go over quickly from in these times, and specifically a gentleman by the name of Nick French. He said, by many indicators, the economy under President Joe Biden is doing great. and again, that's a pretty interesting part. This is a major part of the story here, is that why in the world do, is it a kind of consistent? It's baffling a lot of pundits. It's baffled me at times too. I'm gotta admit, because it's like, we got a pretty good economy here. We got inflation going down. We got a soft landing looking pretty possible. Unemployment is holding relatively stable. It's not, shooting up like so many people predicted it will. And the idea of this kind of recession coming soon. And then, I also really don't buy the kind of explanation from the very, self-obsessed, annoying media liberals that, it's also just what the hicks hear in the media. I think there's got to be, something else to it. I think there's sometimes where, politics just vibes off. I think that comes to voting. But when you poll people and you ask them kind of like genuine questions, I think it's probably also kind of more true with Republicans, that their politics is more kind of anti what the media says oriented. But I think there has to be, there's a certain element here that I think that French kind of gets into that is very, very important for the Democrats to understand, especially going into 2024. Real GDP, he said all the statistics that everyone kind of goes back to saying, oh, this could be a really big thing. This is a good thing. This is a cool situation. So he goes, real GDP has a positive situation from Bidenomics, essentially, the support of Bidenomics. So real GDP has grown 5% since 2019. Unemployment has fallen to a low of 3.7% after a peak of around 15% in the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic. And inflation, although still higher than the pre-pandemic levels, appears to be receding. Real wages are up by 3.5% since Biden took office, with low-wage workers seeing the biggest of these gains between July 2022 and July of 2023. And now that seems to be going down by a little bit, but, is that 3.5% enough? And still, Americans still are unhappy with economic conditions. Several recent polls have found that people in the U.S. hold negative views of the economy and of how President Biden has been handling it despite the rosy macroeconomic indicators. For instance, the Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index has found that consumers' feelings about the economy and their personal finances, although up from an all-time low last summer, was still quite negative by August 2023. And a July New York Times poll found that around 20% of Americans would rate the economic conditions today as excellent or good. By contrast, 49% rated the economy poor. Again, a lot of that could be, how much do people have in terms of savings, and how well are their jobs paying, how secure and how unprecarious, I guess you could say, do they feel in their jobs. The disconnect has led many pundits to wonder what's going on, with some chalking Americans' low opinion of Bidenomics up to partisanship or ignorance, as this is kind of the hoity-toity liberal mindset that I mentioned before. Look beyond top-line metrics like GDP growth or unemployment, though, and you find a more complicated story. Americans report struggling financially, and this is actually a very interesting point and kind of an aha moment here, because in 2022, this was the first year that the pandemic, the assistance, the unemployment, and some of the kind of really strong welfare state, that began to finally dissipate. And it was Joe Biden that did that. He would have been the same as any person doing it. He would have, done it just the same. But it is clear that when Joe Biden comes in, they have inflation going up, and real wages are, by the way, trending down relative to the beginning of his presidency. They're not, just Biden comes in up, and so continuing, it's up, and then it does kind of go down, begin to tip. And that's because these COVID-era welfare policies, that faucet has just been turned off. It's been finally stopped, or it's been stopped starting in 2022, and some of those macroeconomic indicators I think that some are kind of behind some of the support coming off. But I think that turning off of the COVID welfare state, that temporary, quickly erected state, which is actually a very generous welfare state, especially relative to a lot of other countries. I think it rode out a little bit better for other countries because they had the more durable welfare state in place. But we really threw up a lot of money there. But so even as the U.S. economy has reaped continued benefits from those programs and is seeing a jobs boom driven in part by the federal government's historic investments in clean energy and domestic manufacturing, many people are understandably resentful at feeling like this ladder has been kicked out from under them just when they were starting to get used to it. They kicked it away just before it would start to get too popular. If they left it for another 3-4 years, would have been even harder to take away. Child tax credit, unemployment, those certain checks that they send out over those certain intervals. Those were big parts of helping getting people get back on track, and also kind of playing off of the assumption, the fact they were taken away, kind of playing off the assumption that they got right back on their feet really easy, no problems, nothing doing about it. It was real easy. So the situation shows the high-level metrics like GDP growth and unemployment are not good proxies for Americans' quality of life or for economic justice. It also demonstrates the need for progressive economic program of combining ambitious demand-side welfare policies with the supply-side investment programs like the Inflation Reduction Act. That combination is likely to be conducive to actually helping people while being politically popular. So really good piece in these times here. While we can't dismiss the high points of today's economy or the role Biden and National Democrats have played in rebuilding it, real GDP and job growth have not just rebounded from the early COVID recession, but they have outpaced the recovery of many other advanced capitalist countries. And look at what Great Britain is going through, what a lot of Europe is going through. They're seeing, because their dip wasn't nearly as strong. So I think a big part of it is the fact the dip wasn't nearly as strong, so the rise can't be nearly as strong. But their inflation levels, their health of their kind of economic system has not come back nearly as strong, and a big part of it was because of that major investment. It's cited, I listen to British news, and they just look across the pond enviously about Joe Biden's program, the IRA. They look at it and they're like, oh, that IRA could have been real good for us, but. And, because that is a big thing of what happened. They actually did learn from the Obama situation where they put no money back into the stimulus. They made an incredibly weak situation. And they were just like, we don't want to overheat the economy. Well, we overheated it for a little bit. The inflation was high, but we got the inflation back under control. And we didn't, cement the welfare programs into policy. We kicked them away. And I think net, by and large, it made people feel like they were not satisfied with the economy. So that's pretty much what happened there. So the U.S., they've also been, outperforming most of these nations in lowering both inflation and unemployment. The resulting tight labor market has helped to lower income inequality. For the first time ever since the 1980s, we're actually lowering income inequality because of this tight labor market. Absolutely huge moment in that 2021 period for workers. So why aren't Americans celebrating Bidenomics? In a perceptive article by at the New Republic, Kate Aronoff points out that many people simply aren't aware of and probably don't officially care about the administration's efforts to address climate change and create jobs, including the IRA. The problem is that many of these policies are pretty boring. Aronoff says few people get up in the morning are excited about the U.S. share of manufacturing employment or tax credits to install heat pumps. She said, and she goes on to argue, that such projects should be married to more visible public investments in things like parks, swimming pools, and national forests, and the government support for arts and culture, making sure people are having a nice time and know that they know the government is responsible for it, which was a very kind of interesting point to show that, the government's role in the economy, it can't just be behind the scenes. It's got to be a little bit more interesting. So, again, great piece here, and in these times, definitely want to keep coming back to it. All right. And it is a pretty interesting one that we got for you here. We have a situation where we have Medhi Hasan, and credit to Vivek Ramaswamy, this is not something we see a lot of Republicans do anymore. We don't see really a lot of, any major political party just subjecting themselves to any and all interviews under the sun. Really is following the kind of Liz Smith guided Pete Buttigieg strategy of just really trying to just amp up and just amp up the, media appearances, get your name out there, get maybe some spicy clips circulating online. And he actually went on with Medhi Hasan, who is, I think he totally has, he's the definition of someone who has, sold out politically over the years in terms of the style of journalism he's done. But he does do what I call kind of the British style of journalism, which is treat the people on your show and you're that you're interviewing the way they should be treated, like they're dishonest and trying to get something over on you, and really just question everything they say, really hold them to account, and almost kind of almost to a certain extent set them up to really be challenged and pressed. So here is how that sounded.
Action in a party that hates the Soros name, yet you accepted a Paul and Daisy Soros scholarship at law school.
Boom, hit him with a Paul and Daisy Soros scholarship. That's pretty good.
School that was specifically set up for the children of immigrants. It was an affirmative action scholarship, and your defense for that is that you didn't have the money to pay for law school, even though you'd already made over $1 million at the time and made another $2 million.
My defense of that is somebody gives you a merit scholarship at the age of 24, you take it. At the age of 24, somebody gives you a merit scholarship, you take it. I didn't say I didn't have the money. I said at a time when I had a lot less money than now, $50,000
you said exactly I didn't have the money, Vivek. You keep forgetting your quote. You said, when I didn't have the money.
So, Medhi, I've made this really easy for everybody. And I did this in the early weeks of the campaign.
Yeah.
I released 20 years of tax returns.
Yes, you did.
Something that no presidential candidate, let alone somebody who's successful in business, has done. I challenged Democrats and Republicans alike, including the Biden family, to do it.
And you
know what? I released it so that you could look at them, so we can have an honest conversation.
And I appreciate that.
The funny thing I've learned,
I do appreciate that. It's something Trump should learn from you.
I think that transparency is important.
So
it's already open and everybody can see it.
Exactly. We have 2009.
But the fact of the matter is, you know what I would advise every 24-year-old should take $50,000.
And 2010, you made $750,000. You had the money to pay for law school. You didn't need a Soros affirmative action scholarship that you now criticize.
I mean, none of this is worthy, but if you think it is, let's get to the detail. That was actually
Yeah, okay, like so much stuff going on here at the first, like they're going back and forth. Hasan is also holding up the paper, like the old pages of the tax returns, and saying you made 750, which is, by the way, like kind of a great TV prop. Like knowing it's not helping the situation anyway, but just visually shows you like, okay, I got the receipts here. This is my, you cannot question me on because I got the receipts. You could see the bars in boxes and writing the tax return. You can't really see what's on it, but it's just like it's a great way to look super, super serious. And then Vivek Ramaswamy just keep going blah 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 back and forth, just so annoying, just so like slimy and unlikable. And he just keep doing. I know when he's getting in those interviews, really just getting challenged to some of the crazy things he said and done. He does this kind of same kind of continual refrain, which is just like, well, this is really not important, but if it is, like, let's just cater to you. So it's like, it makes him look so weak, because he's just coming out there and saying, not only, he doesn't have a snappy response, he just has a bunch of kind of like mealy-mouthed, Weasley sounding kind of explaining, and just like, well, if you actually have to say that it's better to do this than that, and it's just like, oh, like it's very like kind of unattractive and appealing, and it's just like, or just makes you come off as unlikable. And right away, Hasan gets him on that, and he also comes in and says he calls out. He's like, this is a bad media framing, but I'm still going to play by the framing anyway. Like, does that make a impressive appearance to a Republican voter who's like, wow, Vivek's strong, he's a fighter? It just looks like, he looks more like Ted Cruz than Donald Trump. That is for sure, with his commentary there. So let's hear a little bit more about this.
It is worthy. You say you're anti-affirmative action. You took a scholarship for immigrants.
I'm anti-affirmative action.
So why'd you take a scholarship for the children of immigrants?
Which falsehood would you like me to address? The financial one or the one about my views on affirmative action? Because I can go in whichever order you'd like.
Did you not make $750,000?
On the financial piece of it. Not at the time that I had applied for the scholarship that fall.
Yes, you did.
That December.
Yes, you did, Vivek. This is awkward for you because you did. I've got the tax returns in front of my face.
No, it's not awkward for you. Yes, on December 31st, when the application for the scholarship was that October. Medhi, you're wasting your time on childish details in October of that year when I applied for that scholarship. And it was, well, guess what? The bonuses that a hedge fund pays, and it's a shame that, again, you don't have to be an expert on this, but if you're going to spout out, you better know something about it. People pay at a hedge fund the bonuses at the end of a year, and on December 31st, that's when I was paid. I applied for the scholarship that September, and I did not grow up in a wealthy family.
Vivek, you made more money the previous year.
And this guy, he's like, I didn't grow up in a wealthy family, but he was literally one of the top, if not he was like the top caste in Indian society, and he was just like, he was a very like kind of funny part in his book where he Mrs. Woke Inc. his name in his book, where he'd be like, well, when I was younger in India, it was a really bad caste discrimination problems, but now someone from a lower caste can come and deliver pizza to my family, and my family can tip them to show their appreciation. Like, so he's just kind of just saying like the advancement from just complete discrimination and just treating as second-class citizens to the status of like gig Uber drivers is like a big human rights advancement for them. But like, yeah, he's definitely, the point with that is he did not grow up in a poor family by any stretch of the imagination. But still very, very dishonest here. And Hasan, he has receipts. He keeps hammering him back and forth. And he even had some people from the right who have kind of just looked sideways at Ramaswamy, not really liking what they see, really kind of hammering or supporting Hasan, saying good job, Medhi Hasan, because you really kind of took him to task here.
$200,000 pre-tax or whatever it was.
No, you didn't.
And you know
didn't.
what? Hold
on. No, you didn't. You're now telling flat. In 2009,
you have my tax returns in front of you. I don't remember what I made in 2009.
In 2009, you made $650,000. In 2010, you made less, $450,000. So the argument that you only made the money pre the scholarship, Oh, so now we're bringing tax into it. We've been using gross numbers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Vivek, you're wrong on this. Go back and check your tax returns.
$50,000 obviously makes a big difference.
And then you accepted a Soros scholarship.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, he did give a pretty good job of just like blabbering through it. But yeah, accepting a George Soros scholarship as a Republican, especially when you're making plenty of money already, is definitely not a good look and a great thing for Medhi Hasan, who does something. He's not afraid to just be mean to his interview subjects and make it awkward, be impolite, and that is a big, big benefit towards getting the truth and actually making substantive interviews and not interviews where people just their eyes glaze over because the politician is just talking and just feeding you BS over and over. Hasan's gonna be like, wait a minute. And he I think he came off definitely in that interview better than Ramaswamy does. And you see even the reaction on the right, which is pretty positive. I think that's quite telling. All right. All the time we got for today. We will see you on Friday.